"Pretend to be my girlfriend," the Mafia boss said, but his one condition left single mom. Breathless rain struck the diner's glass windows like tiny fists pounding in fury, demanding to be let in. Steam rose from the coffee pot in my hand, curling in slow, ghostly tendrils that cast a hazy reflection of my own face onto the countertop I had wiped down for the third time that night. I had 3 more hours to go. Just 3 more hours and I could go home, sink into the frayed armchair that had molded to the shape of my tired body, and pretend for a little while that my son's tuition bill, the electric notice, the hospital fees, and the landlord's increasingly impatient knocks didn't exist. Then he walked in. He didn't belong here. Not in this faded, flickering corner of Savannah, where the lights blinked like tired eyes, and the air smelled of old grease and long-held regrets. Not in the place where truck drivers with hollow stares and people fleeing from life itself came to disappear. His suit was black as a moonless midnight, tailored with such cruel precision it seemed each stitch had been sewn with purpose and power. His eyes were volcanic stones, deep and unblinking, scanning every movement in the diner, with the stillness of a predator waiting for its prey to make the wrong move. "Coffee?" "Black." His voice was low, rough, and when I set the cup down before him, the way he said my name made a cold blade run the length of my spine. "Rachel." His voice was velvet wrapped around steel. "You're new." It wasn't a question. "I've worked here nearly 6 years," I said. "You're new. To me." The words dropped like a weight in my chest. I stood taller, my fingers clenching the coffee pot like it might shield me from the intensity of his gaze. Then came the offer. It wasn't a job. It was a favor. Pretend to be my girlfriend. For 2 months, $80,000. I should have said no. I should have turned away, just like I had every other time a man with dark eyes and deep pockets came looking to buy something I didn't want to sell. But when you are a single mother, worn thin and weary, with a son who needs asthma medication every month, with an old credit card debt gnawing at your sleep, and not a single voice who calls just to ask how you are, then even a deal with the devil starts to look like salvation. His name was Julian Moretti. No last name needed. In Savannah, that name alone could still the air in your lungs. And that night, as rain blurred the gold streetlights of the old town into soft streaks of fire, I traded my freedom for a platinum ring, a necklace laced with a tracker, and a promise that things would either change or end for good. In 27 minutes, I would no longer be the waitress in this quiet little diner. I would become the possession of a man who could make people disappear with nothing more than a word. If you're still here with me, thank you for listening to the story of Rachel Moore, a single mother, like so many others, ordinary in the eyes of the world, yet drawn into a game of power where the cost was her freedom, her heart, and perhaps her entire life. Before we step into the next chapter filled with deeper tension and unfolding twists, I'd like to invite you to take a moment to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it if Rachel's journey has stirred something within you. Dear Single Mom is a place where we tell heartfelt, honest, and inspiring stories every day, dedicated to the strong women out there fighting quietly for their families. Where are you listening from? Drop a comment below and tell us the place you're tuning in from, so we'll know how far Rachel Moore's journey has traveled across the map. And don't forget to turn on your notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. Now, let's continue. This is part 2. I never asked him why he chose me. I never asked why a man like Julian Moretti needed to hire someone to pretend to be his girlfriend. Those questions should have come to my lips, but they stayed buried beneath the weight of the image of Caleb's inhaler. Nearly empty again, the fresh hospital bill that had arrived that morning, and the message from his teacher saying my son was once more being bullied for not having a father to pick him up after school. I no longer had the habit of questioning fate, especially when it came wrapped in a thick envelope and an offer that left no room for negotiation. Julian sat motionless in the leather booth, far too refined for this place, yet far too dangerous for anyone to dare look at him for too long. His eyes never left me as I stood there, still clutching the now cold coffee pot like it might somehow anchor me to the only world I knew. "I have a son," I heard myself say, like a confession whispered to the night. "I know," he replied. "No explanation offered, none needed. He is my whole world." "Even better," he said, and then leaned slightly to pull a small black velvet box from inside his suit jacket. When he opened it, the diner's flickering lights caught on a diamond so large it looked almost unreal. Beside it lay a white gold necklace, its pendant an intricately woven letter M entwined with the delicate form of a rose, so finely crafted it stole the breath from my lungs. "The ring marks you as mine." The necklace ensures you keep your word. I knew what it was. A tracking device. I also knew what that meant. No way out, no privacy, no freedom. I swallowed hard, willing my voice to stay steady. I need to pick up Caleb from school every day. I'll take care of that, he said. But the boy will be moved somewhere safer. I have a driver. A private nurse if needed. A home tutor. He will be protected better than anyone else could ever manage. And the money? $80,000, Julian said, like he was naming the price of groceries. 40 tonight. The rest when the agreement ends. 2 months. No more. What do you need me to do? Attend events with me, dinners with my family every Sunday, travel when necessary. Be close, just enough. No need to overact, just enough to make everyone believe this is real. From now until the end of the year, Rachel Moore is Julian Moretti's woman. No one had ever said my name like that before. Not as a call, but as a command, a declaration, a brand burned into who I was. I'm not a call girl. Good. I don't need one, he said, his gaze still unbroken. I'm not buying your body. I'm hiring you to play the role of someone who matters. And I chose you because no one would ever expect it to be you. In some strange way, that hurt more than if he had insulted me outright. He had seen right through me. A single mother, worn out, unseen, with no one and nothing left to lose. This agreement has conditions, I said, surprised that my voice remained steady. I want the first half transferred immediately. I want Caleb's next appointment confirmed, without change, and I will not sleep with you. Something flickered in Julian's eyes. Maybe it was respect. Maybe it was just satisfaction that I understood the rules. Accepted. But I have one final condition of my own. He stood then, tall, sharp-edged like hewn stone. He opened his wallet and pulled out a card, black as pitch, silver-edged, without a logo. Just his name, an address, and a phone number. My driver will pick you up in 30 minutes. Once you leave here, you do not come back. You and your son will stay in a private residence. Everything has been arranged. I'm still on shift, I protested, though my voice sounded as thin and hollow as the pride I clung to. The diner has been paid. You won't be returning. I watched him walk out, his back straight and assured, the rain seeming to part before him, not daring to touch. Through the foggy window, I saw the sleek black car waiting across the street, the driver already stepping out with an umbrella in hand. I looked down at the velvet box he had, left on the table, and lifting it felt like holding a sentence passed. Inside were the ring, the necklace, and a quiet reminder that whatever I had been before was gone now. I turned toward the back room, to the small doorway where Caleb lay curled on a bench, wrapped in my old coat, sleeping deeply. I had 27 minutes to say goodbye to my old life, and step into the most dangerous role I would ever play. As the car pulled away from the tired streets I had walked for so many years, I held Caleb tightly in my arms, his head resting on my chest, still lost in sleep. Outside, Savannah blurred in rain and scattered lamplight, the familiar corners fading like a dream left too long in the morning sun. Marco, Julian's driver, said nothing. The luxury car slid over wet pavement, so silent I could hear my own breathing. I didn't know where we were going. All I had was the black card in my pocket and a velvet box buried deep in my bag. The farther we moved from the city center, the charming old houses gave way to high stone walls, heavy wrought iron gates, and rows of trees trimmed with the kind of precision that only exists in movies. When the car turned onto a long cobblestone drive leading up to a building, I couldn't quite bring myself to call a home because it resembled more a Victorian estate, pulled from another era, than any house I'd ever seen. My heart slowed a beat. Julian Moretti's mansion appeared like something conjured out of a dream, or a warning. 3 stories of white stone, arched windows, and golden light spilling gently from within, like the watching eyes of something sentient and silent. Marco stopped the car at the base of the steps. A woman dressed in dark clothing opened the front door. She was thin, her hair pulled into a severe bun, her gaze sharp enough to cut and unapologetically assessing as she looked me over from head to toe. Miss Moore, I am Eloise, Mr. Moretti's housekeeper. Is the boy your son? I nodded. Caleb. The boy's room is ready. Yours as well. Please follow me. I stepped across the threshold with the uneasy sense that I'd just signed something irreversible. The hallway stretched out long and gleaming, floored with cold marble and lined with antique paintings in heavy frames. A chandelier hung high above us, so high it made me feel impossibly small. The woodwork gleamed with polish, the silence so complete that our footsteps echoed like whispers in a cathedral. Your room is on the second floor, to the right. Caleb's is adjacent. There is a nurse's call button if needed. All clothing and personal items have been prepared. I brought a few of our own things, I know. She cut me off, then paused at a heavy door with a brass handle. Please. The room was already lit. The faint scent of jasmine and aged wood hung in the air. A 4-poster bed stood in the center, draped in flawless white linen like something from a magazine. A reading chair by the window, a fire already crackling in the hearth. Everything was beautiful in a way that felt surreal. I laid Caleb down in the small bed, set against the wall, pulled a blanket over him, and stood still for a long moment, my hand still gripping the strap of my bag. Where is he? I asked, turning to Eloise. Mr. Moretti had urgent matters. He will be home late. You may see him in the morning. I nodded, unsure whether I felt relieved or apprehensive. And the necklace and the ring? Her tone wasn't sharp, but it left no room for misunderstanding. I exhaled, pulled the velvet box from my bag, and opened it. She watched without emotion as I clasped the necklace around my neck, then slid the ring onto my finger, like a silent ceremony sealing something I could never undo. When the cool metal of the pendant touched the skin just above my collarbone, a chill surged through me like a wire of ice. Beautiful, she said quietly. I couldn't tell whether she meant the jewelry or the fact that I had now officially become part of this world. When she left, I stood alone in the room, the soft light washing over the walls, casting shadows onto the portrait of a woman in a wide-brimmed hat sitting on a porch. I looked around. Everything was too perfect. The wardrobe door was ajar, revealing dresses arranged by color, in my size, my style. My old shoes looked absurdly out of place against the rich fabric of the rug beneath my feet. Someone had been watching me long enough to know my shoe size, long enough to prepare for every step I might take. I sat on the bed and removed the ring, letting it rest in the palm of my hand. The diamond caught the firelight, glittering in a way that was almost painful. It was beautiful. And yet in that shimmer, I saw only one thing a price, and I had already begun to pay it. I didn't sleep that night, though Caleb drifted easily into dreams, his steady breathing offering a fragile thread of comfort. Inside me was a storm. The bed was so soft I couldn't feel my own weight, and yet my mind felt heavy, as if someone had poured stones into every corner of my thoughts. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Julian Moretti's gaze from across that breakfast counter, calm, cold, unreadable, and impossible to refuse. Morning began with a soft knock. Eloise entered, carrying a breakfast tray arranged with the care of a 5-star hotel. A glass of fresh orange juice, 2 slices of toast with poached eggs, a steaming cup of coffee, and a folded piece of paper placed beside polished silver utensils. From Mr. Moretti, she said simply, setting the tray on the table near the window. I unfolded the note. The handwriting was sharp, elegant, almost too precise to belong to a man, and yet I knew it was his. We will meet at 11. In the meantime, Eloise will go over the rules. I expect your cooperation. J. I set the note down and looked up. Eloise was still standing there, waiting. Rule number 1, she began. You are never to leave the estate grounds without permission or an escort. Anything you need, you may request. Acting on your own is not permitted. You mean I'm being kept here? I mean your safety is the highest priority, and we do not take unnecessary risks. I said nothing. She continued. Rule number 2. The necklace you wear tracks both location and sound. Mr. Moretti has invested in quite specialized technology. If you remove it, an alert will be triggered. The agreement will be terminated immediately. And I lose the rest of the money, I murmured. Not just the money, Eloise replied, her gaze darkening. Also the protection. We stared at each other for a long moment. I couldn't tell if she was warning me about something specific or simply reminding me that I had entered a world where the rules weren't written down, but everyone knew them by heart. The morning passed in silence. I fed Caleb in his room, where a wide window opened to a garden so perfectly manicured it looked almost unreal. At its center stood a stone fountain, an angel child frozen in the act of pouring water from an urn. Caleb stared at everything with wide eyes. He didn't ask many questions, perhaps because he had already learned, far too young, how to adapt quickly to whatever world I placed him in. Do you like it? I asked, brushing his hair back as he took another bite of a warm scone. Caleb nodded. Mom, is this house like a castle? I gave a faint smile. It is. But not every castle belongs to a prince. He looked at me, puzzled, then shrugged. As long as you're here. His answer caught in my throat. I pulled him into my arms and held him close, gently but firmly, as if I could somehow anchor myself to the only thing in this life that was still mine. At exactly 11, Eloise returned. Mr. Moretti is expecting you in the study. I adjusted my dress, a soft cream-colored piece that had been laid out in the wardrobe for me. No tags, but the fabric needed no label to declare its cost. I slipped the ring and necklace back on and stepped into the hallway like an actress entering a scene she'd never rehearsed. The study was on the ground floor. Thick oak doors opened into a room lined wall-to-wall with bookshelves that reached the ceiling. At the center sat a wide, dark desk, and behind it stood Julian Moretti. He was turned toward the window, the morning light outlining the sharp planes of his face as he turned to greet me. "Good morning, Rachel." His voice was low, carrying a quiet weight, like the opening notes of a sad song. "I hope you slept well. I'm still breathing, so I suppose that's something." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. It was hard to say whether it was amusement or merely the acknowledgement that I still had enough of myself left to be defiant. "We need to talk about your role," he said, motioning to the chair across from him. "And how we'll make the world believe that this is real." I sat, fingers instinctively tightening around the edge of my skirt. The ring on my hand caught the light, a silent reminder that from this moment forward, I was no longer just myself. I was a version of me that had been chosen, tailored, and shaped to fit into something far larger than I could comprehend. And the man across from me, though smiling with effortless grace, held the entire script in his hand. The first evening with the Moretti family arrived sooner than I had expected. Not long after the hour-long conversation in the study where Julian outlined, in detail, the schedule, the events, and the expectations I would be required to meet, Eloise handed me a typed list of rules I was to follow during the family dinner. Do not sit until invited. Do not stare at Mr. Domenico, Julian's uncle, who oversaw the financial operations of the empire. Do not ask about anyone's work. And under no circumstance should I speak of my past, unless someone asked first. I read over the list again before changing, my palms damp despite the cool air circulating softly through the room. Eloise had chosen a deep blue dress for me. It hugged the waist just enough to flatter, with a neckline that dipped low enough to hint without revealing. Caleb wouldn't be joining the dinner. He had eaten earlier in his room, where a tutor had come to introduce herself, and a young nurse remained nearby. Julian said it was for safety, but I knew better. It was also to keep my son from the scrutiny of eyes that did not yet need to know he existed. The dining room was the size of a small concert hall. A long wooden table ran through its center, draped in a white linen cloth, beneath a chandelier whose crystal glow flickered like the last light of sunset. When I entered on Julian's arm, every eye turned toward us. I heard the scrape of chairs shifting, the pause of silverware midair, and the soft laugh of an older woman at the head of the table. "So this is the girl who's," softened my grandson. I knew instantly it was Nonna Rosa. Her hair was snow-white, pulled into a neat bun. She wore a black lace dress and an old rosary around her neck, one that looked as if it had passed through generations. Her eyes were sharp, deep, and unwavering, as though she could see through every polite lie spoken in her presence. Julian pulled out my chair. I sat between him and a man with eyes too cold to be a stranger but too restrained to feel like family. "Rachel Moore," Julian said. "My girlfriend." No one spoke for a few seconds. Then a man with salt and pepper hair gave a chuckle. "Whose niece looks like a statue brought to life?" "I have no family in Savannah," I replied, keeping my voice soft but steady. "She's real," Julian said plainly. "No need for a background check." Dinner began. I kept quiet, speaking only when addressed. They talked about real estate projects, the expansion of their restaurant holdings into Florida, and upcoming meetings with European investors. I didn't understand everything, but I watched closely. Each person had a place. Some spoke a great deal, others only nodded, but it was clear their words carried weight. And then there was Nonna Rosa, who ate little, spoke less, but watched everyone with the same patient intensity as a hawk circling its prey. Occasionally, she asked a question, one and each time, the table fell silent. When dessert arrived, she turned to me. "Do you love him?" No one laughed. No one interrupted. The entire room seemed to pause in its breath. I set down my fork gently and lifted my eyes to meet hers. "I don't know what we are yet, but I do know he was the only one who cared about me and my son when I needed someone most." Another silence. Julian said nothing. Nonna Rosa gave a small nod, then motioned for the plates to be cleared. "Good," she said, Because if you had said you loved him, I would have told Julian to send you home tonight. I couldn't tell whether it was a joke or a test, but I noticed Julian's expression soften just a little, and I understood then that I had passed something that Eloise's rule sheet hadn't prepared me for. When the dinner ended, guests drifted away. Julian led me out to the back terrace, where a garden stretched wide beneath a canopy of floating paper lanterns. Hundreds of them hung in the air like stars that had descended to hover just above the earth. He lit a cigarette but didn't smoke it, only held it between his fingers. You just made my grandmother happy. Not sure if that's a blessing or a curse, I said with a soft laugh. Both, he replied. With her, one honest word is worth more than 1,000 false declarations of love. I looked up at the lanterns swaying in the breeze, their golden glow shimmering like trapped starlight. I had taken another step into Julian Moretti's world, and I still had no idea where this road would lead me. The next morning, I received a message from Eloise. Nona Rosa wished to see me in the East Garden, where she took her tea every morning. It was worded as an invitation, but there was no question it was a summons. Julian had already left the estate early, leaving behind no note except a brief message that he had important meetings in Charleston that day. Eloise led me through a corridor of marble and light, past a wrought iron gate wrapped in the gnarled arms of old ivy. The East Garden felt like a world unto itself, separated from the rest of the estate by time and silence. A gravel path wound through lavender beds heavy with scent, leading to an antique tea table set beneath the blooming branches of a magnolia tree. Nona Rosa was already seated, her posture straight, serene, as though she had been grown from the soil of this place. She wore a dark velvet wrap, the old rosary still looped around her neck, and held a delicate porcelain teacup rimmed in gold. Sit, Rachel. I took the seat across from her, back straight, as if sitting for an examination I hadn't studied for. Eloise poured tea in silence, then withdrew, leaving me alone with the one woman who could quiet an entire family with a single word. Do you know why I wanted to see you? I shook my head. Not to interrogate. I've lived long enough to know that when a young woman chooses to enter the life of a man like Julian, she has her reasons. And those reasons aren't always love. I held the teacup tighter, eyes steady. I haven't lied about who I am. I came here for my son, because I needed to protect him. Julian offered something close to a lifeline. I didn't have many options. What's his name? Caleb. That boy is the only soul in this house whose existence is entirely rooted in love. That's what made me want to see him. With my own eyes, I exhaled, a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I know this isn't a normal family. I don't pretend not to see the power Julian carries, and I'm not naive enough to believe there's no danger woven into all of this. But no one has asked me why. They just see me as part of the arrangement. Julian doesn't bring people here on a whim. He's never brought anyone to Sunday dinner. I know. She was quiet for a moment, then set her teacup down. The sound of porcelain meeting saucer was soft, but it carried weight. I've lived through 2 wars. I watched my husband get shot on our front steps because he wouldn't bow to a traitor. I raised 3 children through chaos, then watched one of them become someone I could no longer recognize. I don't expect Julian to be a saint. He isn't. But I hope deeply that he finds someone who stays not for fear or for money, but simply because she refuses to back down. Someone who sees him and does not look away. I looked into her eyes. They carried the fatigue of generations, but behind that, a spark of something almost tender. Not trust, but hope. Quiet. Steady. I don't know if I'm that person, I said honestly. But I do know I won't run. Not while Caleb still needs me. And not until I understand the man who's willing to place his name and secrets into the hands of someone like me. She nodded slowly. That answer is enough for me. The rest, time will reveal. She rose, steadying herself with a cane. Her gaze softened. Does Caleb like cats? Yes, but we've never been able to afford one. Then I'll have one brought for him. A gentle cat. Quiet. Good at keeping secrets. Like you. I laughed. For the first time since stepping into this house. And in that moment, beneath the blooming magnolia tree, something shifted. Not trust, but perhaps the beginning of something close to belonging. A beginning, at the very least. Julian returned in the late afternoon, just as the final light of day slipped down the stone steps of the estate, like a quiet farewell. I was in Caleb's room, helping him put away a set of toys Eloise had thoughtfully laid out earlier, when I heard the unmistakable sound of a car rolling to a stop in the courtyard below. No one announced his arrival, but the air itself shifted. A thin, Invisible tension spread through the halls, as if the very walls held their breath. "Mom, he's back, isn't he?" Caleb asked, his brown eyes wide and warm beneath the soft glow of the overhead lamp. I nodded, brushing a hand through his hair. "That's right. Keep playing, sweetheart. I'll be back in a bit." I found Julian in the study. He was turned away, shrugging off his coat and draping it across the back of a chair. His tie had been loosened, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows. There was something in the way he stood, in the set of his shoulders, that told me today hadn't been like the others. I stepped inside, the door clicking softly shut behind me. "How did the meeting go?" He turned to face me, his gaze darker than usual. "Do you know who Brian Walker is?" The name hit like a pulse of ice, under my skin. I nodded, slowly. "He's Caleb's father, and the reason you had to work 3 jobs just to keep your son fed, right?" "I don't want to talk about him." "Good. Because from now on, you won't have to." I froze. Julian stepped closer and placed a thick folder on the desk between us, pushing it gently toward me. "Brian is under investigation for money laundering and tax evasion. For the past 3 years, he's been using shell companies under other people's names. Unfortunately for him, one of those names belonged to a woman he once lived with, a woman whose name ended up on a bank account used to transfer funds." I sank into the nearest chair, my hands trembling as I opened the folder. Inside were statements, photos, addresses, evidence that confirmed a fear I had long buried beneath survival. That one day, my past would rise and unravel everything I had built. "You investigated me?" I asked, my voice barely holding steady. "No. I had him investigated, because he's a threat to Caleb, and I don't tolerate threats near people I care about." That last sentence made me look up. Really look. In Julian's eyes, I saw fire, anger, but layered within that flame was something rarer, a kind of protective resolve I had never seen directed at me before. Where is he now? Still out of reach. But he knows I know. And now, he won't come anywhere near you or your son. I sent copies of these documents to his lawyer's office, along with a message. I didn't need to ask what the message said. Julian didn't threaten. He issued orders, and people listened. I closed the folder, holding it against my chest as if it were a fragile shield between me and a world that never played fair. I didn't know whether I should feel gratitude or fear. You didn't have to do this. No, but I wanted to. We stood in silence for a moment. Then Julian moved closer, stopping just in front of me. "He doesn't get to make you shake like that. Doesn't get to make you feel small." My throat tightened. But I didn't look away. Not this time. I'm not afraid of him. I'm just tired. "Then let me be the one to wear him down." A soft, sad smile broke across my lips, carrying with it the weight of all the years I had fought alone. Julian reached out, touching my shoulder lightly. No pressure, no demand. Just presence, steady, unshakable. "You're not alone anymore, Rachel." For the first time, I believed that might be true. In this house of unspoken rules, under the flickering light of a world I still didn't fully understand, I realized that Julian Moretti might very well be everything I was supposed to run from. But he also might be the only person willing to stand between me and a storm I could no longer face on my own. Julian led me back into the study after laying bare the darkest corner of my past, the part marked by Brian Walker and everything I had tried so hard to outrun. I thought that was the end of it, that his actions were simply a form of protection, calculated, perhaps, but protective nonetheless. But the moment the door shut behind me and I caught the shift in his eyes, I knew something else was unfolding. Another chapter, one I hadn't prepared for. He moved to the liquor cabinet, retrieved a bottle of deep red wine, poured into 2 glasses, but placed only one before me. I didn't touch it. He didn't insist. "There's something you need to understand," he said, his voice low and deliberate, as if reciting the terms of a sentence rather than making a request. "This arrangement between yous, it's no longer just a performance. Not after you sat at my family's table. Not now that Brian Walker is a threat to my name." I clasped my hands together, the ring on my finger pressing hard into my skin, grounding me when everything else felt like it might slip away. "What does that mean?" Julian pulled out a different folder this time, heavier, bound in dark leather, its edges tied with a red thread. He placed it in front of me with a quiet finality. "This is a new agreement, formal, signed by legal counsel, containing binding terms. If you accept, for the next 60 days, you will be on record me fiancé. You'll have access to specific assets, and most importantly, you and Caleb will receive an elevated level of personal protection." I opened the folder. The legal language was sterile and cold, but tucked within those lines of clinical ink were things I couldn't ignore. Full educational support for Caleb until the age of 22. Comprehensive health insurance. A property deed for a modest but beautiful apartment in southern Savannah, my name upon completion of the agreement. And one clause stood out, underlined in red. No betrayal. No disclosure. No early exit. This feels like a lifetime contract, I whispered. Not a lifetime, Julian said, watching my every flicker of doubt. Just 2 months. But you have to be all in. No halfway. No pretending halfway. Because the people I'm dealing with, they don't forgive the scent of lies. I didn't ask who those people were. I didn't want to know. I looked down at my hands and noticed the tremor again, not from fear, but from the quiet realization that I was standing at the edge between survival and surrender. What if I say no? You can. But the protections I promised will no longer apply, and I can't guarantee Brian Walker will disappear for good. Julian sat across from me, calm and unyielding. Not threatening, but leaving no room for negotiation either. I've never signed anything that bound me like this. This isn't forever, Rachel. This is a role. But it's the most valuable role you've ever taken. Play it well, and you walk away with a new beginning. Play it poorly, and you and Caleb will be exposed to people whose names you don't want to learn. I didn't have many choices. Truthfully, I never had. Life had never asked me what I wanted. It simply handed me its terms and waited to see if I could survive them. I reached for the pen, my hand trembling slightly. Julian didn't blink. I signed my name. The ink bled fast into the paper, bold and black, like a seal that could never be undone. Julian nodded, folded the document, and placed it into the safe behind his desk. Good. As of tomorrow, you're no longer the poor girl who wandered into my world by mistake. You're part of it now, and every eye will be watching you. I walked out of that study with a weight I didn't yet know how to name. On paper, I had just sold 60 days of my life to a man who could make someone disappear with a nod. But in my heart, there was only one truth that echoed loud and clear. I couldn't afford another wrong step, not when Caleb was still fast asleep upstairs, believing his mother was the bravest woman in the world. That afternoon, Caleb begged to go out back and practice riding his bike. The little, blue bicycle with training wheels Julian's gift the week before had sat untouched until now, waiting for the moment Caleb felt brave enough to try. I agreed, on one condition, that I would stay right beside him, my eyes never leaving him for even a second. The back garden stretched wide and calm behind the estate, shaded by tall, orderly rows of trees. The lawn was trimmed like a green velvet carpet that reached all the way to the distant fence. Caleb pedaled along the stone path, his laughter ringing out like wind chimes in the still air, and for a few brief moments, the weight I had been carrying for days lifted, carried away by the sound of his joy. But it didn't last long. One of the back wheels hit a narrow dip in the path, and the bike tilted suddenly to the side. Caleb didn't fall hard, but one of the training wheels snapped off, leaving the frame lopsided and exposed. I knelt to inspect the damage when a voice called out from the side gate. "Need a hand?" I looked up to see a man leaning casually against the half-open gate. He appeared to be in his 40s, dressed in worn jeans and a white button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up. In one hand, he held a small canvas tool bag. His face was sun-warmed, lean, steady, with clear eyes and a calm that felt rare in this place. "I didn't know the estate had a gardener," I said, cautious. "I'm not. Name's Mason. I handle maintenance of sprinklers, outdoor systems. Usually come by on weekends, but the irrigation system's been acting up, so I came early." I glanced from him to the bike. "If you know how to fix a training wheel, then yes, I really could use the help." Mason crossed the yard and crouched beside me, opening his tool bag without fuss. Caleb sat in the grass nearby, watching him with fascination, as if witnessing a scientist at work on something magical. "What's his name?" "Caleb. Looks healthy. Mild asthma. But he's doing okay." We fell quiet. Just the soft clinking of metal and the rustle of breeze in the trees. I watched Mason's hand steady, practiced. He didn't ask anything more. He didn't study me the way others did here, trying to piece together who I was or how I had ended up inside this gated world. "You don't look like someone who belongs here," he said quietly, eyes still on his work. "That's because I don't, but you're trying." I smiled faintly. "Because there's no way back." He nodded. "I know that feeling." Something about the way he said it made me pause. There was no pity in his tone, No probing curiosity, just a quiet understanding that didn't need explanation. You know, some things break and can still be fixed, like this wheel. But some things, if they keep rolling with the cracks hidden, they'll fall apart completely, and no one will hear it happen. I didn't reply. He tightened the last bolt, gave the wheel a firm shake, and stood, brushing his hands on his jeans. All done, Caleb. You're good to go. Caleb cheered, ran over to hug me tightly, then jumped back on the bike and took off down the path again, wobbling slightly, but free. I watched him, a sudden pressure swelling in my chest, the kind that comes from gratitude so sharp it nearly feels like pain. I owe you a thank you. Mason shook his head. I just fix bikes. As for the heart, if anything there needs mending, that's something only you can do. He turned, disappearing through the side gate as quietly as he'd arrived, and I stood there, watching long after he was gone. Longer than I needed to. Some people pass through our lives like the wind, soft, fleeting, leaving behind no clear trace. But sometimes, just one thing they say is enough to make us pause in the rush that's pulling us too far away from who we once were. And I knew, that day, the man who fixed Caleb's broken bike had mended something inside me to a crack I didn't even know I was still carrying. The rain began around 9 that night, falling steady and soft against the eaves, creating a sound that was both soothing and sorrowful, like the sky was emptying itself of things it could never quite say aloud. Caleb was already fast asleep, his small arms wrapped tightly around his new stuffed bear, his face so peaceful it made my heart ache just to look at him. I turned off the light in his room, pulled the door closed with care, and stepped quietly into the hallway. That's when I saw Julian. He was standing by the ground floor window, the one that overlooked the eastern garden. He wore a black shirt, the collar undone, a glass of wine in hand that he never lifted to his lips. The glow of the lamp behind him cast his reflection onto the glass, blending his outline with the darkness outside and the trails of rain weaving down the pane like ghostly strokes of paint. I made my way down, the cold wood floor beneath my feet grounding me as I crossed the space between us. Drawn by something I didn't fully understand only that I needed to be near him tonight, after a day that had quietly undone me in ways I hadn't expected. "Can't sleep?" he asked, eyes still fixed on the rain. "No." The sound of it always brings things back. Julian turned to face me. His gaze, usually so sharp, was soft now. Still, waiting. "I can't sleep either," he said. "Every time it rains like this, I remember the things I should have done differently." We stood in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't ask to be filled. Then he set the glass down, stepped closer. Just enough that I could feel the warmth of him, the energy between us stretching thin in the space that remained. "Do you regret it?" I met his eyes that saw too much, too clearly. "Regret signing the contract. Regret walking into this world." I shook my head. "No, maybe I don't understand everything I've stepped into. Maybe I've underestimated the danger, the cost. But I've never once regretted choosing to protect my son in any way I could. As for the rest," I hesitated. But the rain outside felt like a veil between us and the world, softening the edges of fear, and I found myself speaking the rest aloud. "I regret loving someone who never loved me back. I regret believing I deserved to be left behind. But being here right now, no, I don't regret that." Julian closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. And in them, I saw something caught between the pull of memory and the weight of wanting. A quiet war he hadn't decided whether to win or lose. "Rachel," he said, his voice low, and for the first time, it held no command, no control, just something unguarded. "I don't know how to love the way other people do. But I know what it means when I can't stop thinking about someone, when just one glance, one smile, makes everything else blur into the background." I didn't move. I hardly dared to breathe. I don't know if what we have is real, or just the shape circumstances have carved us into, but I know. If you left tomorrow, I wouldn't be able to go back to who I was before. I heard it, a levery word, every pause heavy with truth. And I understood. This wasn't a declaration. It wasn't love as the world defines it. But it was everything Julian Moretti had to give, while his heart was still stitched with wounds he hadn't let anyone touch. I reached for his hand and laid mine gently over his. "I don't need promises. I just need to know this moment is real." Julian tightened his fingers around mine. We stood there, saying nothing more. The storm outside murmured on, and in its hush, there were no contracts, no titles, no ghosts of past mistakes crowding between us. Just a man full of secrets and a woman with a heart once shattered, standing together beneath the eaves, trying to believe in something that felt a little like hope. The morning after the rain, the villa was strangely quiet. Caleb still slept soundly in his room, his breath steady beneath warm covers, his little face peaceful in a way that made my chest ache just to witness. I stepped out onto the balcony with a feeling I couldn't quite name. The early light filtered through the tree canopy, catching on the drops still clinging to the leaves and railings, as though nature itself were gently rinsing away what had passed. But some things, I knew, could not be washed clean. Julian's hand had held mine tightly in the dark, and though he hadn't spoken the words, something in what he said had awakened a part of me I thought had been long buried. When I turned to go back into the room, I noticed I'd a single envelope on the table. No one in the house had mentioned mail. There was no postal mark, no sender's name, just my name, handwritten in slanted black ink on thin cream paper, to Rachel Moore. I hesitated. Just a breath. Then opened it. Inside was a single sheet, 2 lines. He can't protect you. Forever. Some debts aren't paid with money. Watch Caleb. I stood frozen, the paper in my hand suddenly heavy. My heart thundered in my chest, pulsing in my ears, each beat sharper than the last. There was no signature, no clue to who had written it, but every word carried the quiet menace of a blade pressed to the throat. I crushed the letter in my hand and ran, down the stairs, through the halls. Searching. Julian was gone. Eloise said he'd left early, with no word on when he'd be back. I stepped into the garden, desperate for air, for steadiness. But as I neared the largest magnolia tree, I stopped. Movement, behind the fence. A shadow, a figure, Tengon. I ran to the fence, breath tight in my chest. No one. But a broken branch lay freshly fallen in the grass. Someone had been there, watching. Possibly the person who left the note, possibly Brian. I turned back toward the house just in time to see Caleb stepping outside, holding the white kitten Nonna Rosa had given him. His eyes were still heavy with sleep. "Mom, the kitty wants to go out." I rushed to him, dropped to my knees, and wrapped my arms tightly around him. "Not today, Caleb. Stay inside with me, okay?" I didn't explain. He didn't need to know about the shadow growing behind us, about the eyes I could now feel tracking every move. I called Julian. No answer. Called again. Still nothing. I left a message, my voice low, measured, just a few words. "Please call me back as soon as you can." Then I hung up, and sat with Caleb, holding him close, trying to force down a piece of dry toast I could barely taste. An hour later, Julian walked in through the side door, his coat draped over one arm, his face more severe than I had ever seen it. He looked at me, then at the letter I had flattened back onto the table like a crime scene that refused to be ignored. "Who brought this?" I shook my head. "I don't know. It was here when I woke up," Julian read. The words again. Said nothing for a long moment. But I saw the change in him. It wasn't anger that rose. It was calculation. Cold, precise. We're tightening security. Caleb doesn't step outside unless someone I trust is with him. Julian, who do you think it is? Someone from a past I haven't fully cleaned up. Could be Brian. Could be someone else. Someone else. The kind of men you've never met. The kind who don't issue warnings unless they mean to act. I clenched my fists. The fear inside me rose. But it wasn't the kind that froze me. It came mixed with fury, with helplessness. So what do? Julian's eyes met mine. The gentleness of last night was gone. This was truth, stripped bare. You stay sharp. You get stronger. Not for yourself. For Caleb. Because if this turns into a game where lives are on the line, you don't get the luxury of falling apart. I nodded. Slowly. No more questions. No tears. No panic. Because now I understood. The storm I thought had passed. At also dida. Was only just beginning. And this time if I didn't hold steady, it wouldn't just take me. It would take everything I loved with it. That night, after Caleb had drifted into sleep, his breath soft beneath the warm weight of blankets, and the nightlight casting a gentle glow like the hush of a safe dream, I sat alone in my room, holding the ring Julian had given me on that very first day. The cool metal pressed against my fingertips, a quiet reminder of the life I now lived, of the signature I'd scrawled onto a contract I barely had the luxury to consider, of a road I had chosen to walk, knowing full well there would be no way back. The letter this morning hadn't simply been a threat. It had been a reckoning A sharp tug that pulled me from the illusion I'd been clinging to, that I could stand at the edge of Julian's world without being swept under. I was no longer the woman wiping down counters in a roadside diner, pretending a spilled coffee was the worst of her worries, and that everything would somehow right itself. I was a mother now caught in a storm, and my son's very existence had been drawn into a game more dangerous than anything I had allowed myself to imagine. I looked out the window. The garden below lay draped in darkness, thick and unmoving, like a curtain too heavy to lift. The extra security lights Julian had installed glowed faintly through the trees, but instead of comfort, they only made the shadows between the trunks more vivid. Julian had placed guards outside. I knew that. But I also knew perhaps more than any that fear doesn't always knock at the gates. Sometimes it sits in your chest, quiet and patient, where no one else can stand watch for you. I remembered Julian's face as he read that letter. It hadn't been rage. It hadn't even been protectiveness. It was the look of a man who knew, with absolute clarity, that he was being hunted and would do anything to keep the pieces of his world from falling apart. But he couldn't do it alone, and I couldn't keep waiting. I stood, crossed the room, and pulled out an old notebook from the drawer, worn, bent at the corners, and the only thing I had brought with me from the tiny apartment back in Boston. Inside were scribbled addresses, fragments of thoughts, names I had tried not to remember, and one, written in red ink and underlined twice, Claire Saunders. She had worked with me at the diner. She had seen Brian at his worst. She knew what he was capable of. She knew the truth I had buried for years. I tore a small piece of paper, scribbled down a note, and tucked it into my coat pocket. Tomorrow morning, I would ask Eloise to take me into the city. I wouldn't wait another day. I wouldn't let Julian carry the entire weight of what was coming. And if the past had come back to collect its debt, I would face it with my own 2 hands. I moved to Caleb's bed and leaned in, kissing his forehead softly. The scent of baby shampoo clung to his hair, warm, familiar, and so heartbreakingly pure. It softened something inside me, but only for a second. Because being a mother doesn't mean shielding your child from every storm. It means learning to stand in the center of it, to be the shield when there is nothing else left. And if I had to fight, I would fight like a mother with no way out. For Caleb, for myself, for the fragile survival we now clung to in a world I once thought existed only in nightmares. That Saturday evening, the Moretti estate took on an almost surreal beauty. Golden light spilled from tall windows, casting warmth onto stone columns and the gravel path that wound its way to the grand entrance. Inside, the sound of string music moved slowly through the air, mingling with quiet laughter, polished conversation, and the gentle chime of crystal glasses meeting like silver bells. I stood before the mirror in the dressing room, wearing the crimson evening gown Julian had chosen for me 2 days earlier. Silk clung to my frame, pooling at my ankles, the open back held only by 2 delicate strands across my shoulders. It wasn't revealing, but it made me feel as though I had stepped into another skin, another version of myself, one that no longer moved with the hesitance of a single mother simply trying to survive, but with the awareness of a woman who understood that every glance in this place could be a knife, every smile a test, every step a gamble. And tonight, I would walk into the fire not as a guest, but as someone who knew the stakes, and no longer feared the burn. Julian stepped into the room just as I finished fastening the last earring. He wore a charcoal tuxedo, the black tie neatly knotted, his hair slicked back with deliberate precision. His gaze settled on me for a second longer than usual, saying nothing, but heavy with something that felt like both a warning and a quiet tenderness. "What is this event tonight?" I asked as we descended the stairs together. "A fundraiser for the city's arts foundation. But really, it's a chance for men like me and the men who oppose me to look each other in the eye under lights instead of in the dark. And what am I tonight?" He turned slightly, resting his hand gently at my waist. "You're the fiancé they're all curious about, and the reason I can keep them just far enough away." The answer didn't comfort me, but I understood. We entered the grand hall. For a moment, conversation dipped, heads turned, some nodded politely. Others looked at me from head to toe with the subtle intensity of people wondering whether something unfamiliar belonged in a place like this. But I kept my posture tall, offered a small, practiced smile, and laid my hand on Julian's arm as if I had belonged to this world my entire life. About an hour in, as the evening reached its peak with wine, music, and murky conversations about politics, investments, and modern art, I saw him. At the far end of the room, amid a group of men in gray suits, stood Brian Walker. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo like the others, but a suit that looked merely adequate. He was leaning in close to a man I recognized vaguely as a local developer with a reputation for cutting corners, clearly his ticket into a room he had no business being in. He didn't stand out because of his appearance. He stood out because of his eyes, cold, drawn, and full of something old and festering hatred, maybe possession. He looked at me like I was something he'd once owned and couldn't believe had ended up here, in a place I didn't belong. No surprise, no rage. Just that calculating stare I knew too well, the one he wore after every failure, when he sat in silence thinking of how to pull others into the pit with him. I turned away, pulse hammering in my chest. I didn't dare meet Julian's eyes. I feared what he would do, and how quickly everything might come undone. But, minutes later, I felt it. Julian had noticed. His hand tightened around mine, a silent signal. From this moment on, the party was no longer a show of power. It was a battleground. He stepped away without a word. I didn't catch what he said to the few men who followed him out of the ballroom, but I watched them leave. I stayed behind, smiling carefully, while a kindly older woman talked to me about her recent donation to the local theater. I nodded, responded with grace, but my ears were tuned to the distance. My eyes never left the door where Brian had stood, and then, for just a breath, I saw Ida's shadow slipping past the glass outside. Then nothing, gone, as if it had never been there. Julian returned not long after, quieter than usual, focused. We said nothing about Brian for the rest of the night, but as we walked to the car, my coat draped over my shoulders, I saw it. A small streak of red on the cuff of Julian's sleeve. Not wine, not paint, blood. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. I simply reached for his hand, not to hold him back, but to anchor myself, because I knew. The line that once stood between us and the world out there had been torn wide open. And I was no longer the woman just passing through a nightmare. I was living inside it, and there was no way back. We returned to the estate just as the clock struck midnight. Caleb was already asleep. Eloise met us at the entrance with her usual composure, quietly informing me that he'd eaten well and gone to bed without asking for me. Still, I went straight to his room before anything else, the instinct of a mother who has learned to live with quiet dread. He lay curled beneath the blankets, his breathing steady, his small hands wrapped around the edge of the sheet. Bathed in the soft glow of the nightlight, he looked untouched by the shadows that had followed me home from the party. I stood there for a long moment, breathing in the stillness, trying to bury the memory of what had happened beneath layers of silence. But when I returned to my room, I knew the night would not end quietly. Julian was waiting. His coat was gone, his tie loosened, but his calm exterior had not wavered. Only his eyes betrayed something deeper, something I couldn't quite name. "I need to know what happened," I said, skipping every polite detour. He didn't respond immediately. He walked to the liquor cabinet, poured himself a glass of whiskey, took a long sip, then finally turned to face me. "Brian's been warned before. He should never have shown his face there. And he damn sure shouldn't have looked at you like you were still something he owned." "What did you do?" "Didn't kill him," Julian said flatly, "though he deserved it. I simply made it clear that if he ever comes near you or Caleb again, he won't have hands to hold a knife, feet to run, or a breath left to speak." I sat down on the edge of the bed, my thoughts churning. It wasn't fear that twisted in my chest. It was the quiet, unsettling truth that what Julian said didn't scare me. Not because it wasn't brutal, but because it made me feel safe. "Do you think he'll stop?" Julian shook his head. "No. Men like him only stop when they no longer have the means to hurt anyone." I clenched my hands tightly in my lap. I used to believe he had already taken everything from me. But tonight, when I saw him standing beneath those chandeliers, among people who didn't know what he really was, I realized something. He's nothing now, just a shadow. But that shadow still clings to me, Julian. It still waits. Julian moved toward me, knelt slightly, and lifted my chin with his fingertips, so I had no choice but to meet his eyes. "You're not the only one living with a shadow. We all carry them. Even me." He paused, and something shifted in his voice. "I had a brother once." I blinked. It was the first time Julian had ever spoken of family beyond Nonna Rosa. He died because of me. Because I made a mistake when I was too young to understand the weight of consequence. I thought I was strong, thought I didn't need anyone, but arrogance carries a price. And that price was a life, his life. And I've carried that debt ever since. Like a wound that never scars. I sat in silence. And in that moment, the invisible walls Julian kept so carefully constructed began to crack. I saw him not as the man in a tailored suit who issued threats like orders, but as someone who had known deep loss, who bore it silently beneath every layer of control. "So you know what it's like," I whispered. "To live with the past. To wake in the middle of the night and not know if the nightmare has ended." Julian didn't speak. He didn't need to. I reached for his hand and held it in mine. "Then this time, we don't run," I said softly. "We face it." He nodded once, his eyes no longer cold but steady. "But to do that you need to be stronger, Rachel. Not just for Caleb. For yourself." And I knew he was right. The next day, I went to see Claire Saunders, an old friend from Boston. The only person who had truly witnessed how broken I had once been during the years I lived with Brian. Claire was no longer the waitress wiping down counters beside me on late shifts. She was now a paralegal at a small but respected law office, and when she opened the door to greet me, her embrace held something more than warmth. It held recognition and resolve. "I've been waiting for this day," she said softly. "The day you stood up to take your life back." We spoke for nearly 2 hours. I told her everything. About the letter, about Brian's appearance at the gala, about the contract I had signed with Julian and the world I had stepped into since. Claire listened without judgment, her expression calm as she took notes. Every detail absorbed with the precision of someone who knew the law but also knew pain. "We can build a case against him," she said, "not just for what he did in the past, but for the threats to your safety now. But Rachel, if we take this legal, you'll have to come into the light." I took a deep breath. I've lived in the dark long enough. On the drive home, I caught my reflection in the car window. Not the same Rachel Moore from 5 years ago. Not the woman who flinched at her own shadow or told herself that survival was enough. I was a mother, a woman who had learned to look her past in the eye and say, "I'm not afraid of you anymore." And this time, if the ghosts came back, I wouldn't run. I would fight, with everything I had. Caleb sat in the back seat, his small backpack on his lap, his fingers gently stroking the worn fabric of his green stuffed dinosaur. He hadn't said much since we left the estate, just watched the sunlight filter through the canopy of trees, the road beneath us broken into patches of light and shadow. Green Pines Summer Camp sat north of Savannah, tucked between tall pines and the still surface of a wide lake. Julian had suggested it somewhere Caleb could spend a few weeks surrounded by nature, laughter, and normalcy. At first I hesitated, but Julian assured me his people would be close, and more than that, Caleb deserved to feel like a child, not a boy growing up behind walls where weapons were hidden in drawers. "How do you feel?" I asked quietly as the car turned onto the gravel road leading up to the camp gates. Caleb shrugged without looking back. "I'll be okay." My throat tightened. That wasn't something a 6-year-old should ever have to say. But Caleb wasn't like other children. He had seen too much, felt too much. The kind of fear most people never saw up close had already brushed against him. When we got out of the car, a young counselor stepped forward to greet us, her voice warm, her smile bright. Caleb gripped my hand tightly, then slowly let go as she crouched down to speak to him. He gave a small nod, then walked beside her into the camp, his tiny footsteps disappearing along the stone path. I stayed behind, watching, my chest heavy. Julian stepped beside me, hands in his pockets, his gaze following Caleb's retreating figure through the wooden gate. "He'll be all right," he said, reading my thoughts as if they were written on my face. "I know," I answered, but deep down, I wasn't sure of anything at all. We drove back to the city in silence, the road unspooling beneath the tires, pine trees passing like sentinels. I said nothing. My mind was filled with thoughts of Caleb sitting alone among unfamiliar faces, of him waking in the night without me there to hold him, to chase the monsters from under his bed, to wipe away tears no one else would understand. And yet, somewhere in that quiet, I finally understood what Julian had once told me, that strength isn't the absence of fear. It's walking forward in spite of it. And I realized that if I kept Caleb wrapped too, tightly in my arms, if I let fear dictate how we lived, I wouldn't be protecting him. I'd be teaching him that the world was something to run from, not something to face, and I would not pass my fear down to my son. That night, as we returned to the estate, I opened my phone and saw a message from the camp. It was a photo Caleb sitting at a table, a serious expression on his face as he colored a picture of a dinosaur. Behind him, a little girl with curly hair was smiling at him. My heart eased a beat. Julian appeared from the hallway just then, catching me smiling at the screen. He didn't ask. He just stood there, silent, as if this moment fragile and fleeting was something worth holding on to. A quiet pause in the middle of all the chaos and shadows we were still learning to live inside. I folded the phone closed and looked at him. You were right. Caleb needs to learn how to live like a child. And I need to learn how to let him do that, without always keeping my hand clenched around his. Julian didn't respond. He simply held out his hand, and I stepped toward him, placing mine in his not out of dependence, but as a gesture of walking forward together. In a house that once felt foreign, where every echo made me feel small and misplaced, I was beginning to feel something I thought I had lost. A home, maybe not permanent, maybe not safe in the ways most people understand, but it was real, and I would do everything I could to protect it. That night, Savannah fell into rain again. Not the sharp, wild kind that had rolled in the night I first met Julian. No, these were quiet drops, drawn out, soft, like the hush of a sad melody. I sat by the window in the reading room, watching the back garden where the branches swayed gently in the breeze. The estate was calm. Caleb was safe at camp, sending me a new drawing each day with scribbled notes that made me laugh and ache all at once. But the quieter the world became, the louder the unrest inside me grew. Julian entered without a sound. He always moved like that, quiet, assured, like someone born of shadows, yet somehow the kind of shadow you find yourself wanting to follow. I knew he was watching me, but I didn't turn. You can't sleep, he said, not a question. There's a lot to think about. I thought after everything, things were clear. I stood facing him. His eyes, dark beneath the golden light, held secrets and something deeper, something hungry. Julian, I began slowly, these past days, you've given me something I haven't had in years, a sense of being seen, protected, known. But I can't help but ask, if tomorrow I walked away from this life, from your world, would I still be anything to you? He didn't speak at once, just stepped closer, until only a breath stood between us. You are the one I chose, he said quietly, in a world where I never let anyone in. You're the one who made me rewrite rules I swore would never change. You broke through walls I didn't even realize I'd built. His voice was low, too real, and I wanted to believe him. But my heart had been misled before, tricked by things that looked like love, only to find control and possession beneath. So if one day I want to leave, I said, steady, not out of fear, but because I want to choose my own life, would you let me go? His jaw tensed. Something unreadable flickered through his gaze. No. I lifted my chin, met his eyes without flinching. Because I belong to you? Or because you can't bear to lose? He didn't answer, but the silence said enough. Julian, I said softly, I don't want to be something you hold on to because you're afraid. I want to stay because I choose to stay. But if I'm no longer part of your plan, if I choose freedom, not a contract, not a promise, would you let me walk? He exhaled slowly, eyes no longer sharp. Gently, he reached up, brushing his fingers along my cheek. Rachel, you don't belong to me. You've never belonged to anyone. You are the woman who walked into my life without asking and made me love you in a way I didn't think I could. But I'm not good at love, and I'm afraid that if I let go, I'll never find my way back to you. I laid my hand over his. Then don't hold me with fear, hold me with trust, with love if that's what you truly have. He nodded slowly. I will learn to love you not like a man who owns the world, but like one who wants to build it with you. Outside, the rain kept falling, gentle, steady. And inside, we stood on the edge of something still unnamed, between possession and freedom, between control and connection. And I knew that if we had any chance of moving forward, it would only be by choosing each other, not because we were bound to, but because our hearts said yes. The next morning, the sky over Savannah was covered in a faint, ashen gray. There was no rain, but the air hung thick, heavy, like a storm waiting just off the coast, watching in silence. Claire called me shortly after breakfast. Her voice was low and firm. Brian Walker had just been taken into custody in connection with an assault that occurred near the area where he used to operate. The witness statements were unclear, the evidence not yet strong enough to prosecute. But this might be the only chance I had to file a formal complaint if I wanted to finally bring him to justice. I stood frozen for a moment after the call ended, still clutching the cold phone in my hand. Julian stepped in from outside, set a cup of coffee on the table, and his eyes immediately caught the shift in me. Something had changed. I told him everything, every word Claire had said, in exact detail. Julian wasn't surprised. He simply nodded, his gaze calmer than I had ever seen. So now it's your decision. I looked into the empty space ahead. The years. I had lived in the shadows because of Brian. The scars on my arms, the sleepless nights holding Caleb when he burned with fever, the endless running for fear that Brian might find us again. All of it played in my mind like an old film rewinding itself. Julian, if I take him to court, if I make this public, are you certain he won't hurt Caleb again? Julian stepped closer, leaned down, and held my eyes with his. I won't let anyone have that chance. But if you choose to forgive, not because he deserves it, but because you need to be free of him, then I will understand. I closed my eyes. The memories no longer pierced as sharply as before, but they were still there, and if I kept letting them steer me, I would always be the same woman, always the frightened one, the mother who ran. I went to the police station that afternoon. Claire was waiting. We walked through a long, cold hallway, each step growing heavier with memory. When the door opened, I saw Brian, sitting inside, hands resting on the table, his eyes hollow. He was thinner, his hair unkempt, his expression no longer sharp with anger, like the last time I saw him at that party. He looked at me, blinked once. There was no surprise, no fake regret, no challenge in his gaze. Rachel. He said my name like wind passing through an empty room. I sat down across from him. There was no glass separating us, no armed guard watching, just an old wooden table and two people who had once been everything to each other, now nothing more than echoes of what used to be. I didn't come for an apology. I don't need one, I began. I didn't come for revenge either. I've had that chance, but I realized I don't need to win the way you taught me to. Brian lowered his head, his voice raspy, as if he hadn't spoken to anyone in months. I knew you'd grow stronger. I just didn't think you'd grow this strong. I didn't cry. There was nothing left to cry about. I had shed it all over the years he pushed me into the depths of anguish. I came here to tell you one thing. I stood up, looked at him for the last time. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry you with me in my mind for one more day. I turned and walked out of the room. With every step, it felt like a stone fell from my shoulders. Claire walked beside me, saying nothing, only placing a quiet hand on my shoulder, a silent gesture of understanding. That evening, I returned to the house. Julian was reading in his study, the amber light casting gentle shadows along the bridge of his nose and his thoughtful brow. He looked up when I entered. I walked to him and said nothing. I just held him. He didn't ask. He only wrapped his arms around me, steady and certain, like a place to return to. I know now that forgiveness is never easy. Forgiving someone who once broke you might be the hardest thing you'll ever do. But, sometimes, forgiveness is the bravest act a person can choose when they decide the past will no longer define their future. I did that today. And I know that whatever comes next, no matter how difficult, I am no longer the woman who trembled in the dark. I am Rachel Moore, a mother, a lover, and the woman who chose to forgive the devil to finally be free. 4 days later, Caleb returned from summer camp with sun-kissed cheeks, messy hair, and a smile so wide it tightened something deep in my chest. The moment he stepped down from the shuttle, he ran straight into my arms, his small hands wrapping tightly around my neck as if he had never left. Julian stood behind me, hands in his pockets, watching us with a look I had grown to recognize. It was a quiet, tender gaze, no longer the guarded eyes of someone trying to control what he could not understand, but the steady look of a man who had learned to love with everything he had to give. Caleb chattered on about camp, about a girl, named Mia, who laughed a lot but hated soup, about a counselor who told jokes with a red nose, and the time he slipped during a race but still won candy because, in his words, I didn't give up. I listened, smiling and blinking back tears. In his innocent stories, I could hear the fractures in his heart slowly healing. That evening, Nonna Rosa called from her estate in Charleston, inviting the three of us to what she called a can't say no family dinner. I knew she had sensed the quiet changes taking root, not just in me, but in Julian as well. The drive to Charleston took nearly 2 hours, not exceedingly long, but long enough for me to glance back and see Caleb asleep in Julian's arms, his head resting on Julian's chest. One small hand clasped tightly around Julian's without letting go. I turned and found Julian already watching me. No words passed between us. Just a silent connection, steady and profound, stronger than anything either of us could have said. Nonna Rosa's house looked just as it had the first time I visited, warm and full of life, scented with freshly baked bread and a hint of basil drifting in from the garden out back. She welcomed us with a long embrace and whisked Caleb into the kitchen, as if she had known him since the day he was born. I stood watching them, struck by how natural it felt, how nothing about the closeness seemed forced. That night, we sat around a long wooden table, joined by Carlo and his wife, their twin daughters with curls like coiled ribbons, and a cousin visiting from Chicago. Laughter filled the room. Silverware clinked softly against dishes, and Caleb, mid-bite, was gently reminded by Nana not to swallow too quickly if he didn't want the hiccups. As I looked around the room, something quiet broke open inside me. It wasn't some grand swell of emotion or a cinematic moment. It was a subtle realization. This was family. Not the kind written on paper or bound by rituals, but the kind that sees you, accepts you, and loves you without asking for anything in return. Julian's hand found mine beneath the table. I looked at him and saw that his eyes no longer held the coldness I once feared. They were warm now, steady, filled with something unspoken yet deeply understood. I held his hand in return, not because I needed an anchor, but because I wanted to walk with him into whatever came next, as a choice, not a refuge. After dinner, with Caleb fast asleep on the sofa, Julian and I sat on the porch with Nana. She poured me a glass of sweet red wine and looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "You know, Rachel," she began, her voice soft like wind brushing through leaves. "Family is the one thing in life you don't have to perform for. You don't need to try to please anyone. You just need to be true to yourself. And if you feel peace when you're with someone, then that is your family. No further permission needed." I listened to every word, as it settled gently into my heart, soaking in like a quiet blessing. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake beneath an unfamiliar ceiling, holding Caleb in my arms, and for the first time in what felt like forever, my heart was not burdened with questions about the future. I no longer wondered how long Julian would keep me by his side. I no longer feared whether I was good enough to belong in the world he lived in, because I had come to understand something essential. Family does not come from a contract, nor from a title. It is born in the quiet moments when no one is pretending, when no roles are being played. And I, Rachel Moore, had finally found that. Not in a mansion built on power, but in warm embraces, in laughter around a dinner table, in a glance that needed no explanation. Sometimes, family is simply the place where your heart no longer needs to stay on guard. Late that afternoon, I took Caleb to the park on the southern side of Savannah, where ancient magnolia trees arched into a canopy of deep green, casting gentle shade over a wide field of grass. The breeze was soft, laced with the faint scent of blossoms, and the golden light of early evening slipped through the leaves like delicate ribbons of silk. Caleb ran ahead, laughing as petals fell into his hair like tiny ivory umbrellas. I stood beneath the largest tree, its rough bark wide enough that it would take 3 grown people to wrap their arms around it. It was here, not so long ago, that I had sat alone, crying out of fear, lost in questions I couldn't name, worried for my son, for myself, for a future that felt like fog. But today, I stood there no longer a woman carrying silent scars alone. I stood as someone who had chosen to begin again, to rebuild her life from brokenness. Julian arrived a few minutes later, without a call, without a word. He walked toward me, holding a small brown box in his hand. There were no grand gestures, no flowers, no music, only wind, blossoms, and the quiet gaze between 2 people who had weathered storms and were still standing. Julian opened the box. Inside was not a dazzling diamond, but a simple white gold ring, engraved with 3 words on the inside: Rachel and Caleb. He did not kneel. He simply asked, his voice low, steady, sincere, "Do you want to choose us? Not out of fear, not for money, not for any reason other than your own." I looked at him. I looked at the child running through the dusk, and I knew. The answer had never been clearer. Yes. 1 word. But within it lived an entire journey of forgiveness, acceptance, and the courage to begin again. Life does not always give us the chance to rewrite the first page, but it always gives us the chance to choose a different ending, and sometimes that ending is the beginning we never dared to dream. Dear friends, the story of Rachel Moore and Julian Moretti is more than a romance between 2 people from opposite worlds. It is a quiet but powerful reminder that happiness doesn't always come from what is perfect. Sometimes, it comes from the bravery to walk through pain and choose yourself again. You may be a single mother like Rachel, balancing 1,000 weights, or simply someone lost in the fog of uncertain days. Believe this, you are worthy of a full life, a true home, and a love that asks for nothing but your truth. If this story has stirred something in your heart, we invite you to subscribe to our channel, like, and share Dear Single Mom, so we can continue bringing you heartfelt, inspiring stories every day. Has Rachel's journey made you think of yourself, or someone you once knew? We'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Your honest, thoughtful reflections matter more than you know. Thank you for walking with us all the way to the end. Wishing each of you good health, a joyful life, and the kind of peace that stays with you through every day. Until next time, take care, and see you in the next video.